everybody. Welcome to the last session of the day. You made it. This is a best practices track. If you haven't been in one yet, it's sort of a quick takeaway, tactical takeaway session where we pair industry thought leaders with some of our brand side speakers. And today we're going to be talking about those two magic words, fully aligned, something we're always striving for, and you know, gaining the buy-in you need at every step from stakeholders. And the two people that we're going to be talking to who've done it are Ginger Schimpf from SAP and Anna Heidecker from Kern. Welcome, ladies. Oh, we made it. Wow. So, Ginger, a lot of people were in your earlier session. You talked to a pretty much packed house. But for anyone who wasn't, if you can just kind of quickly review the amazing award-winning, Reader's Choice Award-winning.
There you go.
There it is, proof.
Quick show of hands. Was anybody not in the session? Because I don't want to go into laborious detail.
Be honest.
Okay, you all were. Fantastic.
Great.
See how fast that was?
Optimizing.
Optimizing. So just really quick, it was a thought leadership campaign. My VP asked me to run, and I told her that she was so funny. I knew they would be asking for demand gen. So we started with 19 industries in North America, and we turned a thought leadership campaign into a demand gen campaign. We can flip quickly. So for those of you who, whoops, can we go back one?
Oh, yes.
Please. So for those of you who saw this slide before, thank you. And I wanted to do just a really quick recap. Remember, we started with a single piece of content, and we ran it through a process whereby we were able to create in excess of 650 small, snackable, worthy of being shared digitally native pieces. So I'm going to bypass the overview of the campaign. If anybody has any questions, guys, I am not at all precious. Sing them on out. But wanted to tell you basically how we put it together in the background with our partner in crime, and hopefully give you some tips and maybe some, I don't know, key takeaways, some really good pieces that you could seek your fingers into and maybe be able to replicate on your own. So let's just start with the whole sort of, you know, pulling people together, harnessing all of the disparate stakeholders inside your company that you have to work with. So on our side, which is the client side, we had stakeholders within all of the industries. We also had stakeholders within marketing, and we had stakeholders within sales and stakeholders within stakeholders. And so what we were trying to do was to set up a cadence of updates so that we could get our jobs done. We were all given permission to do our job. We were not micromanaged, but of course people are very, very curious when they're not hearing from you. So we had to set forth some sort of process to get that done.
And I think one of the most amazing things is, like you said, you were doing all of this effort, coordinating across so many teams, and you had to make it look effortless to your customers, who then responded with these fantastic results.
Absolutely. So, you know, not to be repetitive, but we did start early with, and I'm going to put you on the spot here in a second, Anna.
I can't wait.
So we did start early with the softer metrics. How many people were listening to a podcast or were viewing a video? You know, any early indicators that we had that the campaign was starting to build a momentum, right? So we started with those early metrics because our marketing funnel is probably almost as long as our sales funnel. And I think the interesting thing is I had visibility into how we were updating internally. And we actually worked with a number of agencies. Anna is representing the agency that did our big creative eye candy piece of it. But we had other agencies along the way who were integrated with us. And we were pulling from each of them to communicate internally. But I'm wondering, I can't believe I never asked you this, how you maybe kept the updates going back at currently. How does the agency do the updates?
So yeah, we'll all learn at once. This is how it works. No, and we'll get into it a little bit later because I can relate it, or maybe I'll stop there. How many people have worked with an agency? So how much of the stereotypes can I throw in there? Great. Okay. So everyone will nod their heads along with that. So as you've all experienced, I mean, all the typical agency stereotypes kind of do exist. They come from somewhere, but it's chaos, but an organized chaos. The same way I think it is on the client side, or I'm sure it is. It functions much of the same. So you've got the gatekeeper, but not the bottleneck. That would be me in this case, or Ginger in SAP's case. And you're in charge of the communication. And we'll get into autonomy a little bit later, but it's really just having somebody that's responsible for communication. So when there's a breakdown, you know where to point fingers. So I would say meetings may change a little bit. There's more beanbags at our office than yours probably, but you know, there's sort of those stereotypes.
So the sad part is at SAP, we say that we have a pretty brutal expression that I'll release on you later, but we don't use beanbags. We resort to name calling.
Name calling. Oh, I mean for sitting on, not for.
No, I thought you were throwing them at people. Okay.
More ping pong tables. How about that?
Ping pong
Although we don't have ping
tables.
pong tables. Sorry, went on a tangent.
So how do we do it?
So yeah, so with all
Like
of
this, it's great.
Yeah, this is how we did it.
So yeah, the main question, the reason why we're all here, how did you do it? And we're going to start off by diving into your internal best practices.
Okay.
Starting off with how you were setting expectations and gaining that necessary buy-in.
Gotcha. So I would say that budget is always going to be the case, and you all probably heard me say at the last session that yes, we're SAP, but we do not have unlimited funds. We absolutely do not. My budget is pretty akin to a rounding error. And so what we had to come up with was a strategy of playing to our strengths. So what could we do versus what could we not do? And that had to be outsourced. And we work with a number of different agencies with different partners. And in particular, here I'm going to put JC on the spot. Raise your hand, JC, wave. So we have an agency that helps us with a lot of our execution, but they also they know our brand guidelines and they help us keep track of that. We have agencies who maybe just do a small graphic piece, or maybe we hired an agency to do a video piece. The key was turning to Kern and expecting Kern to interact seamlessly with all of us as though we were a single unit.
And I'll add to that. I'll go back to one of those stereotypes, and I'm sure as you work with agencies, you know that we like to use the metaphor of building a house. So back on that previous of campaign pillars of setting those objectives and gaining buy-in from the very start, sticking with it is really what sets up success. And that sounds very cliche, but it's very true. So we relate it to buying a house or making a house in the sake of, if I'm the building company or the construction company, I need to know three main things. Sorry. One of those, you know, is who you're building it for. So you need to know what their objectives are, what their expectations are. You need to know your budget, what you're working within or what you're operating. That's going to dictate your tools or whatnot. And then you need to know the move-in date, really. So there's three pillars that I would say that while we don't actually call them house things internally, those are kind of how we communicate them or how we build expectation from the start. And then things usually at least line up well. There's curveballs, especially when it comes to a larger campaign like this. But that kind of leads into now what we're looking at here, which is now you have the contract in place, if you will, and now the building begins.
Right, and now think of it, if I can extend your analogy, to a subdivision, right?
Yes.
Where you have templates,
All
right?
Mm-hmm.
So you heard me say that we did have a lot of templates. And part of the template was not just what you see, it's what you read, what you hear. And so we went to Kern and we said, live business is the thing. And we're taking it to live industries. So here's your curveball. Hope you have your catcher's mitt on. And they did. And so they were able to come back with an integrated, unifying message for us. And then we were able to version that down from one industry to the next industry. I feel like I have my back to you. But everything worked within the template. The template allowed enough flexibility, but not enough for us to really get into trouble. And we do have an example later on that will show you what I mean by getting into trouble. But when I then had to go back and communicate to all the different teams, it was very easy for me to say, give me this piece. How would you talk to your marketplace for this piece of it? So the template was able to let us break it down and make it look unified, but it was also flexible enough to let us speak in the language that we needed to from one version to the next.
Scalable is our marketing buzzword for that, I suppose. And the only other point that I would add to that is the rigidity is the enemy. Ginger just touched on how staying fluid, the live business example. And I would say that rigidity being the enemy, scrutiny would be your friend, not in a bad way, but in a scrutinize everything, the good and the bad. It's definitely not a winging it approach to the campaign. We weren't ad hocing anything. It just was going with the flow.
So you were just talking about how you have to stay nimble and keep everybody aligned at the same time. So how did you manage your time during the execution process?
So again, we formed a tiger team is how we really set it up. And the tiger team was supposed to be very nimble, was supposed to be temporary, right? So we weren't in it for a marathon, we were in it for the sprint. Let's get this piece done, everybody go back to your corners. And everybody had their industry that they owned, but then they worked together to help each of the other industries so that we were all able to stay at the same place. And I would say that when we got down to version control from one industry to the next, and we were trying to make sure that they were within the same theme across. The other thing is to make sure that we weren't somehow breaking a mold that we didn't mean to break. And by that I mean, this was not the only campaign in market. So we use internal collaboration sites, I'm sure you all do, and that helped us with our communications. Our Tiger team had weekly meetings, but then we had monthly meetings with a wider spectrum of stakeholders, and that helped keep the communication on a cadence. They knew that they were going to get an update at a certain place.
So I'll go into that a little bit to reflect what we did on the inside for meeting cadence, but first I'll extend, for the sake of poking fun a little bit at those stereotypes again, the metaphor, the tiger team metaphor. I tell Ginger that we have our own kind of version of spirit animals in the animal kingdom at the agency, and there's multiples of them, but they kind of fall into the 4 categories. You have the client or the campaign manager, and that would be the equivalent of a parrot. They've got the top-down view of the world. They have the highest level of insight, and the job or the function is really to repeat back the important details to make sure everyone's on the same page. Then your secondary tier would be your creative team. So your art directors, your creative director, whatever level that is, and they would be the peacock. In this example, they're there to make things look good. And forgive any to the copywriters out there, but they would be the equivalent of a hyena. They kind of laugh at their own jokes all the time, but keep things interesting. And then lastly, you've got the beaver developers. They are building things and never sleep. That's essentially the team. So if you were to, the point of this communication is key, being not over communication. No one likes those email chains where everyone's CC'd because then no one takes action back to the autonomy and ownership. But it's more of just making sure that, as you could imagine, that entire animal team in one room and every meeting, there's a lot of chaos that would ensue. So we had not only those weekly meetings, but what we ended up doing is doing a daily email that would go out before 10 a.m. our time every morning, and it would say, hey, creative team, or hey, dev team, here's the things that we're looking for from you, even though we already talked about that in another. It's just, you can never be too careful, and that kept us on task.
At SAP, if you're being kind, I was the maypole around which everybody was weaving, right? And so it was my job to make sure that any piece over here who needed to communicate over here and back there was doing that. But the more brutal term that I hinted at before, I was the one throat to choke. So if something went bump in the night, my desk was where it landed. And so that, I think, is really important. You do need that one person who has the oversight, not the one person who's doing all the work or who's taking all the credit just because I'm sitting up here on stage. We had an amazing team, but you do need that one person who's on the hook.
So let's turn over now to your customer-facing best practices where you made all that work and throat choking look easy and simple.
You bet.
And that starts with, my favorite part of this campaign is that you kept it moving, but you also made time to weave in some creativity and make it honestly sounded like a lot of fun for you guys.
At times it was really fun, and at times not so much. Anna gets credit for the headline here that you're looking at. Sometimes you want to stop and add something to the campaign because you have that aha moment. We were constantly doing research, and as I had spoken about previously, we did find this research where this amazing number of senior executives, 59% would rather watch a video than read anything. And 54% of senior executives will share a business-related video at least weekly. So here we're sitting with these beautiful white papers. What do? So we created a script, and the script was derived from the white paper, and then we created a video that hooked the senior executive, with the goal being that the senior executive would read that, watch that, and then pass it on to somebody else to read the white paper. So, we followed all the best practices about how long their attention span might be in order to create those videos. An example of something that we desperately wanted to do, but we had to just, at the end, say, not gonna happen, we wanted to do a virtual forum. We wanted to have tracks for each industry. We wanted to have avatars. We wanted to have partners come in. We wanted to disseminate and just throw into the great unknown all of this great thought leadership material. And it was so overwhelming that at one point I just went to my VP, Michelle, and I said, Uncle, I just don't see how we're going to do it.
It's near this.
That's right. So there's an example of something that we were able to accomplish and something that we took off the table. So to Anna's point, rigidity can be your friend, and it can be your enemy.
So everyone knows that we love our Venn diagrams. And this is what a vetting Venn diagram would look like on the agency behind the scenes world. So to those ideas that Ginger just outlined, there's many more that didn't make the cut or that did, but this is really what we would measure it against. So we've learned a lot, or we've talked a lot over the last couple days about the what I like, the shiny object syndrome. There's so many technologies and new tools that come out that frequently on both sides, client side and agency side, it's like we want to try that or we want to do that. Whether it's something like a Facebook campaign or a new infographic or a new version of doing something, this would be the test that we would measure it against. So I'll just give one example for the sake of clarity. At the bottom there, if we were to look at that, and we're going to imagine these 3 circles as our pillars, or that house example I made at the beginning. So you have your objectives, your KPIs, or how you're going to measure success at the end of it, your timeline, of course, very self-explanatory, and your budget. So it's going to measure against, or it's going to fall in one of those 4 quadrants, and if you get lucky with that unicorn in the middle, you did it. But most times you don't. Most times it's just one of those overlaps. So at the bottom, if it's something like, if it would be a chatbot. Chatbots are really big right now. It's getting into the AI market. If you want to install a chatbot and maybe it fits your timeline and your budget, but your objective for the sake of this example is lower in the funnel and it's a conversion, then a chatbot probably doesn't make sense. And then you ask yourself, like, is this better for another phase project? Is it better for another audience? It doesn't have to be removed from the table, but it's just kind of a litmus test against all those wacky ideas that come up in the beanbag whiteboard room. Or on the stakeholder side, either one.
I just need to interject. She said if you get lucky, there is a lot of work and a lot of brain power back there, so it's not just luck. But I think the key here is, once you decide to engage with an agency, they have responsibility for the project as well. I think they took ownership, and they would push back. And we'd slam the phone down and swear, and then we'd call them back, and we'd go at it a while.
That's why I think the shiny object syndrome, everyone's guilty of it because it's exciting. Especially now, there's so many of those tools and new things that are coming out that it's like, well, why don't we throw that at this campaign? And it's like, does it make sense, and is it going to make it that much better? So that's that. And then just on that, so I'll back up against that. Every idea needs to be vetted against something into, I'll play devil's advocate and say that at the same time, you do want innovation and you do want to evolve. There's another one of those buzzwords, that innovation word. But it's not relying on the blueprint. So just because there was a nurture campaign you did 2 years ago, or just because you built a landing page, you need to push it. You need to make it a more creative example. You need to make something better, and what we call that is Frankensteining. If you take an old idea and try to put a new face on it, that's not really what's going to land you those big results. So not relying on the blueprint, and that's why we talked about the template, but really it was more of a scalable asset, not necessarily a template. So the example here to bring it down to Vegas was the Sands Hotel opened early 50s, and if hotel brands and contractors would have stayed there, the Venetian and all of its gondola glory would not be standing there. So it's
and how
keep
sad
moving.
would that be?
And how sad would not gondola? I don't know. We haven't gone there yet, but. So yeah, it's keep pushing it. Definitely go against the Venn diagram or whatever checklist version that you want to. But again, it's just making sure that you're hitting those 3 key components: your timeline, your budget, your objectives.
So we call it glocal, right? You want to you want to be global but act local. So we call it glocal. And so I told you that we used our template and we tried to stick to it, and that there were dangers if you don't. One of our, by and large, our campaign, remember when you were in high school English? Everybody just nod, so I know that you're with me, okay. And you were taught to write either in a pyramid style or an inverted pyramid style. Our campaign was a pyramid style. We wanted to grab attention quickly, so we went out with an industry message. And then we started backing up and laying bigger groundwork to show how it all flowed. One industry wanted to go the other way around. And they wanted to say, I'm sorry?
There's always one.
There is, right?
Yes.
Why is that? So he came out with the broader information piece, and he built downward to that point. And he was the first, he being the owner of that industry, he was the first one when we were doing our debrief. I'm sure you all call them postmortems, as we do, which is so sad, right?
It is sad.
So when we were doing our end of campaign debrief, he was the first one who said that he was grateful that we allowed for the flexibility, but it caused so much extra work for him to buck the system that he's the one recommending, no, stick with the template. So just wanted to point that out, that that kind of thing can happen.
So just to kind of wrap this up, just tell us a little bit about your top takeaways from all this work you did and everything you accomplished together.
I'm smiling because I have a favorite quote, and I hope you say it.
Yeah, so I am guilty of this quote. So you know how it is, you get the call in the middle of the night or early in the morning when you're at a global company, the middle of the night is up for interpretation, right? Mm-hmm, sure. And something's gone wrong or something's delayed and it's going to back up your whole timeline and everybody's scrambling to accommodate and everybody's hyperventilating and your heart is careening against your rib cage. Take a deep breath and remember that we don't do pediatric trauma surgery. Nobody dies from what we do.
Not for this campaign. No.
We all made it, right? Yes. On the other hand, we do have stakeholders, and they're German. Right? I'm a Schimpf, she's a Heidecker. We get to say this. So at this, you have to have a certain amount of forgiveness. But at the same time, you have to be cognizant of, we had to be cognizant of the fact that our stakeholders were really counting on it because we report to the street monthly, right? So our forecasts were being, fed into our CEO. So we had to, we absolutely had to. So that's a top takeaway is be forgiving, but not lenient.
Yep.
That's a key takeaway. Remember that we're working with people and people are fallible.
That's big, and I think that's huge in agency culture. That's big in the relationship, and we're extra lucky, but because it's not exactly that easy. I know we've all been there. So, but the be human is a huge thing, and that extends to every campaign or every project that I've ever done. And again, I think that's something people relate to. And
I think we've all been there, right?
We have.
You make sure that you've slammed the phone down before you swear, because you need to get it out. You don't want to go home and kick your dog. You need to get it out.
No.
But you know what? Nobody got up that morning and maniacally rubbed their hands together and say, how could I screw up her life today? So they didn't mean it. So make sure that phone went down before you swear, and then you take a deep, calming breath, and you call back. and you have the conversation, because you know what? It was hard for someone to come to you and say, hey, I blew it today. You know, and I've been the one who's blown it. I know that. It's really hard to say that.
And then I think in the keynote this morning, he was talking about get out of the way. You know, hire good people or have a good team, and then like let everyone do their jobs. And Ginger talked on that before, of giving the authority to do people's jobs. Like that works. It always does.
Right. I did not have a micromanager. This campaign meant a lot to my VP, but she gave me permission to do my job.
Right.
And of course, once you finish a campaign, you breathe a sigh of relief, and people immediately ask you, all right, so what's next? And we have a little video to play to illustrate as you talk.
This was all Kern, so pay attention.
Yeah, and I can just talk while it's going. There's no sound, so I'm not talking over anything. It's just really, it's showing the animation. So if you caught Ginger's session, which we all agreed that we did, it's switching to a different audience. So in this case, what we did is going after that net new lead. This survey or this assessment was created and just recently launched a couple months ago. Not even February? February, yeah.
Late February.
All the time does fly. But so what this was done is we took a step back and wanted to make a little bit something that was a little more, had that eye candy appeal, going after net new, a little bit more flashy. That's why you see the animation. But so what we did is we took those unifiers, so it wasn't too general. People were still interested in it, despite the fact that it was cross-industry. And then the idea being that the survey results, when we hit that critical mass, as we referred to it earlier, what we can do is then produce new pieces of content that come out of this content.
The really neat thing about this particular piece is that people interact differently.
Right.
You know, you're entering a number, or you're sliding a bar, or you're clicking. It's a lot of fun. And if you noticed, one of the other things that happens is the colors change depending on what your answer is. Then the line that takes you to the next question will match what your color. So we had a lot of fun with this one.
And stay tuned.
Yeah.
Stay tuned.
Yeah. Everybody wants to know the results.
So that's all the time that we have for today. Ginger, Anna, thank you guys so much. Can we get a round of applause for them?
Thank you all.
And if you guys have any questions for them, they're very nice. Just come up to them after the session, maybe grab a drink or two with them, and they'll spill all their secrets. They'll tell you anything.
Right. It's 5 o'clock.
Margaritas, everybody.